This is DontCallTechSupport, and today we have a 6-core CPU shootout featuring Intel's i5-10400, Intel's i5-10600K, and AMD's Ryzen R5 3600. Which one is the best gaming CPU? This is Intel's Core i5-10600K, which is an unlocked processor with 6 cores and 12 threads. It has a base frequency of 4.1 GHz and a boost of 4.8 GHz, but when testing, the all-core frequency, when all the cores were loaded, was about 4.5 GHz. We tested without multi-core enhancement, but left the power limits to auto on the motherboard. This particular chip was in no hurry to reach 5 GHz, so I had to brute force it with 1.4 volts and an AVX offset of 1. The result was that it ran pretty hot and chugged down a good amount of power, as we will see a bit later on. But for the first test run, we tested on a Gigabyte C490 Aorus Elite AC with 60 GB of 3200 MHz CL16 memory running in dual channel, with the CPU running at its default speeds. Then I applied the 5 GHz overclock to the CPU and swapped out the memory to 16 GB of 3600 MHz CL18 memory, overclocked to 4266 MHz CL16 with an on-core frequency of 4.5 GHz. I tested this way because I wanted to know how much performance we could extract from this chip, and this was also the memory speed I tested on the 10400 a couple of weeks back. We also have the AMD Ryzen R5 3600, first running at stock speed with the same 3200 MHz CL16 memory, then using PBO and AutoOC with the memory running at 3733 MHz CL15. We could run the memory at 4266 MHz, but this will actually hurt its performance because it will be desynced with the fabric speed, which incurs a massive latency penalty. The max fabric speed on our chip is 1866 MHz, therefore the memory speed is 3733 MHz. All CPUs ran with the Corsair H115i RGB Platinum. This is a 280mm AIO, which got a bit of a workout with the overclocked 10600K, with temperatures peaking at 90°C. The GPU I used for testing was the Aorus RX 5700 XT, and most of the tests are at 1080p, with some at 1440p. I had to part with the 10400 before I could finish all my testing, so it is not present in all the charts we are going to see today, but the 10600K and the R5 3600 will be. We start off with some synthetics. Firestrike seems like a good place to start. We are only looking at CPU and combined score here, and the stock i5-10600K and the R5 3600 with fast memory is performing about the same, with the stock R5 3600 coming in slightly behind. The overclocked i5-10600K is stealing the show here, with both the CPU score and the combined score being the highest overall. If we move on to Timespy, things change more in favor of the i5-10600K. At stock, the 10600K is scoring higher than the fastest R5 3600, and overclocked, the CPU score is increased by 1000 points. Now let's give the R5 3600 a chance to redeem itself in Cinebench R20. Here the overclocked i5-10600K was running at 4.9 GHz, as this is an AVX workload. The stock i5-10600K comes in behind both the R5 3600 multi-core result, but is close to the single core speed of the R5 3600 running PBO and AutoOC. Overclocking brings it ahead of the R5 3600 in both multi and single core score, but there is a cost to that. Next up here is power and efficiency while running the Cinebench benchmark. Basically, we time the run itself and measure the average power draw while running the benchmark, and this is what we found. At stock, the i5-10600K is pulling 57 watts more than the stock R5 3600 from the PSU's 12-volt rail, and 50 watts more than Intel's own 10400. When overclocked, total power draw from the 12-volt rail is increased to 242 watts, which is over twice the power of the R5 3600. And now you should be able to lower this by either not pushing 5 GHz, or perhaps you have a better chip so you can push 5 GHz with lower voltage. But cooling does become a bit of a challenge at this point. The other figure in this graph is how many kilojoules the CPUs used on one run of Cinebench R20. So lower basically means better efficiency. At stock, the i5-10600K uses 63.7% more energy than the stock R5 3600, which obviously is a drawback of the 14nm process. But how does this relate to games? Well, we took the R5 3600 and the i5 10600K for a spin in Shadow of the Tomb Raider and recorded the peak power consumption while running our benchmark in the game. The R5 3600 and the 5700 XT pulled 304 watts from the 12 volt rail while running this, but this was also the worst performing results. So the R5 3600 with PBO and Auto C performed on par with both the Intel results with a power draw of 321 watts. The stock i5 10600K is not doing a bad job here, only pulling 15 watts more when in game, which is not a bad result at all. However, when overclocked, the power consumption increases by 70 watts to 406 watts, and that is a large increase in power draw for a fairly small increase in performance. So let's move on to the gaming benchmarks, and kicking things off is Assassin's Creed Origins. At 1080p, the R5 3600 came in at 63 frames per second on average. The i5 10600K at stock came in 2% ahead, and if we pair the 3600 with some fast memory and Auto OC, we see a large 13% performance bump, bringing it in front of the 10600K, but overclocking the 10600K basically makes it 10% faster than the fastest 3600. Moving to 1440p with 3200 MHz memory, the i5 10600K is 9% faster than the 3600 here with the same memory speed. If we pair the 3600 with some fast memory and enable PBO and Auto OC, it essentially matches the stock i5 10600K. Overclocking the 10600K makes it lead the 3600 by 7%. The next title is a racing sim, Assetto Corsa Competitzione. At 1080p, the R5 3600 is the slowest, coming in at 82.6 frames per second on average. Both the 10400 and the 10600K are faster here, and the stock 10600K is 11% ahead. The 3600 is able to catch up with some faster memory and now manages 94 frames per second on average, but again the i5 10600K and the 10400 are 16 and 4% faster respectively. Next up is another game with only R5 3600 and i5 10600K testing, and this is Anno 1800. Here the R5 3600 is 4% ahead of the 10600K at stock, and when paired with fast memory and overclocked, the 10600K takes a 3% lead. So during this test we are zoomed all the way out of a large city and rotating above it, and during this time we are completely CPU bound, although Anno 1800 is not really scaling much with core count, so the results there are pretty close. The next title is Battlefield 5, and I tested in an online server which makes the 1% and 0.1% low have a very high variance, but the R5 3600 did 145.3 frames per second average here, and both the i5s were faster, with the 10600K leading the 3600 by 11%. With some fast memory, the R5 3600 gets a much needed boost in performance, now coming in at 163.1 frames per second on average. This means that it edges out the 10400 with fast memory and the 10600K at stock, but by overclocking, the 10600K gains a 3% lead. If we increase the resolution to 1440p, we are basically met with a hard GPU limitation and all the CPUs perform about the same. CSGO is next, and this test is basically just a sightseeing round on the Dust 2 map. We are looking at some high frame rates here. The stock R5 3600 comes in at 372.7 frames per second on average. The i5 10600K is 4% ahead here at 386.5 frames per second on average. If we pair the 3600 with some fast memory, it's not quite enough to catch up to the 10600K, and when that is overclocked, it ends up with a 2% lead. Division 2 is up next, and here there was a small error in my previous video where both the Ryzen results were the same. This is corrected on this chart, and at stock the 3600 came in at 148.5 frames per second on average, matching the 10400 with 2666 MHz memory. The 10600K at stock is 9% ahead here, but if we give the R5 3600 some fast memory and enable Auto OC, it's getting close to the i5 10600K stock result and again matches the 10400 with the fast memory. The 10600K when overclocked does however take a 9% lead. Next up is an MMO, Elder Scrolls Online. We have increased the in-game FPS limit to 300, but it is essentially impossible to be GPU bound in this game at 1080p with this class of GPU. The i5 10600K comes in at 82.7 frames per second at stock here, which is 3% behind the R5 3600. When overclocked though, the 10600K is able to match the R5 3600 result with the same treatment. Moving on to our first Vulkan game, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. At stock, the 10600K comes in at 139.8 frames per second average, a substantial 15% lead over the R5 3600. Overclocking the i5 10600K gives us a 7% performance bump, and now we are 6% ahead of the fastest R5 3600 result. 1440p is greeting us with a GPU limitation as we have seen before, so all the CPUs perform about on par with each other. Next out is our second Vulkan game, Rainbow Six Siege. So here I ran into a problem. Between testing the 10400 and the 10600K, Ubisoft have updated the in-game benchmark with no way to use the old one. This makes the results incomparable, which is why we only have the 10600K and the R5 3600 here. The 0.1% low needs to be ignored because it is caused by a stutter in the beginning of the benchmark and happens on every run. The i5 10600K stock here comes in at 339 frames per second average, which surprisingly is 5% behind the R5 3600 at stock. An overclock quickly solves that though, and now we are at 387 frames per second on average. 4% ahead of the fastest R5 3600 result, but we can't really fault either CPU's performance here. And moving to 1440p, we are running into a GPU limitation again, but the stock i5 10600K result is actually slightly lower, but there is nothing major though. Shadow the Tomb Raider is up next, and here at medium settings we are actually somewhat limited by our GPU, even at 1080p. Apart from the stock R5 3600 result, which is somewhat lower, this is really a testament to how powerful all these CPUs are. Moving to 1440p makes no sense, so instead we move over to the other Tomb Raider game. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, we do get to see a difference. The stock i5 10600K is 13% faster than the stock R5 3600 here, while the R5 3600 with PBO and fast memory is able to match the stock i5 10600K result. It does come up 5% short of the overclocked i5 10600K. Moving to 1440p brings us the GPU limitation, but the overclocked 10600K is able to edge out the other results here though. Last game tested is The Witcher 3. And at 1080p, the 10600K at stock settings comes in at 109 frames per second average, a 15% lead over the stock R5 3600 and tying the 10400 with fast memory. Giving the R5 3600 some fast memory brings it to 104.4 frames per second average, which is not quite enough to catch the 10600K at stock, and overclock the 10600K is 16% faster. Looking at relative performance across 7 games that was tested with both the 10400 and 10600K, here the 10400 pair with the 2066 MHz memory is our baseline, and the stock i5 10600K running 3200 MHz memory is on average 6.8% faster at 1080p. Both the R5 3600 and the 10400 with fast memory is actually on average 1.4% faster than the stock i5 10600K, but overclocked with fast memory, the 10600K is 16.2% faster than the 10400 with slow memory and 8% faster than both the R5 3600 and 10400 with fast memory. Moving on to only comparing the R5 3600 and the i5 10600K through the 11 games they were tested in. Here the R5 3600 with 3200 MHz memory is our baseline, and the stock i5 10600K is on average 3.2% faster, giving the R5 3600 some fast memory and enabling PBO and AutoC gets it 11.3% performance boost on average. If we overclock the 10600K and give it some fast memory, it's almost 18% faster than the stock R5 3600, but down to 6.5% faster than the optimized R5 3600. Now let's take a look at value, and we start off using the 7-game average as a baseline to be able to have the 10400 in this comparison. Here the R5 3600 is offering better value at $167 than either Intel CPU. The 10400 is not that far behind though. Assuming you have a cooler, the 10600K is $2.36 per average FPS, which is close to $1 more per FPS or 63% more than the 3600. Add in a Hyper 212 cooler to that and it's more than $1 more per average FPS. And you can offset some of that by overclocking the CPU, but the end result is about $1 more per average FPS compared to the R5 3600 and slightly less compared to the i5 10400. Now let's see what happens if we include 4 more games. With the 11-game average as a baseline, the outlook doesn't change a whole lot. You are still paying about $1 more per average FPS compared to the R5 3600, and it's actually slightly worse here at 68% difference versus the 63% difference with the 7-game average. There's not really any way around this. The R5 3600 and the 10400 are better value, but the 10600K is obviously faster. So there you have it. The 10600K is the fastest 6-core gaming CPU on the market today, and therefore it does get my recommendation for people who want the best gaming CPU or the best 6-core gaming CPU. If you have a 240Hz or 144Hz monitor, this might just be the CPU for you, but for more casual gamers, I still think the Ryzen R5 3600 is a better choice. As we saw at 1440p, we are quickly becoming GPU bound with the 5700 XT, and that was with lower settings than what I personally used to play with. So this would potentially change with a more powerful GPU, but it is also dependent on the settings you're playing at. For example, I'm playing at 3440 by 1440 and I want the best fidelity I can get. That means that the GPU is a lot more important for me than the CPU. But there are a few exceptions to that, like MMOs. Which is typically CPU bound even at high resolutions with ultra settings, and well, a couple of other games. I suppose Anno 1800 is somewhat CPU limited depending on what you do, but yeah, so it kind of depends on what kind of playstyle you prefer, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope this was somewhat helpful or interesting to you. So yeah, farewell for now.